The moment Beatrice Palmer saw the sun bleeding crimson across the New Mexico sky that autumn evening in 1877, she knew she had found something worth capturing forever, though she did not yet know it would be a man, and not merely a landscape that would claim her heart. She had traveled from Boston 3 months prior, a decision her mother had called reckless and her father had called necessary, given the circumstances of a broken engagement that had scandalized their social circle. Beatrice needed distance, air, and most importantly, inspiration for the artwork that publishers back east claimed lacked passion and authenticity. So here she sat, 22 years old and unaccompanied, except for the boarding house proprietress who had warned her about wandering too far from Soccero's dusty streets. Her sketchpad balanced on her knees as she worked charcoal across paper with determined strokes. The ridge overlooked a valley where cattle grazed in the distance, and the failing light turned everything golden and soft. She had been coming here for 2 weeks now, always at the same time, always alone. The solitude suited her. Back in Boston, she had been surrounded by people constantly, suffocated by expectations and the whispers that followed her everywhere after Jonathan Whitmore had publicly ended their courtship upon discovering she had sold illustrations to a magazine under a false name. A proper lady did not work, he had declared. A proper lady certainly did not pursue art as anything more than a parlor hobby. Beatrice was discovering she had little interest in being proper. She was so absorbed in capturing the way light played across the distant mountains that she did not hear the horse approaching until it was quite close. Her hand jerked, leaving an unintended mark across her sketch, and she looked up with a start. The rider sat easily in his saddle, silhouetted against the sunset she had been drawing. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of apology. "Did not mean to startle you, miss," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent considerable time in the Southwest. "Just surprised to see someone up here is all." Beatrice felt her heart beat slow from its startled gallop. "I come here most evenings," she said, then wondered if that was wise to admit to a stranger. But something about his posture suggested he was more curious than threatening. "I have noticed," he said, and when her eyes widened, he added quickly, "Not watching you particular, just that I ride this way often. Drive cattle through the valley below. Name is Jackson Ellis." He dismounted then, and she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots scuffed from hard use. Everything about him spoke of long days outdoors and honest work. He kept a respectful distance, holding his horse's reins loosely. "Beatrice Palmer," she replied, because good manners were ingrained even if propriety was not. "I am staying in Socorro while I work on a series of landscape illustrations." "You are an artist," he said, and it was not a question. His eyes went to her sketchpad with what seemed like genuine interest. "May I see?" She hesitated only a moment before angling the pad toward him. He took a few steps closer, careful to keep several feet between them, and studied her work with an expression of concentration. "That is remarkable," he said finally. "You have captured the exact quality of the light. I have seen that view 1,000 times but never quite seen it like this." Warmth spread through her chest at the sincere praise. "Thank you. I am trying to do justice to this landscape. It is quite unlike anything back east." "You are from back east then," he said. "Boston." "Is my accent so obvious?" A smile tugged at his mouth, and she noticed he had a pleasant face, weathered but kind. "Bit obvious, yes. What brings a Boston artist all the way to Socorro?" She could have given him the polite deflection she had perfected over the past months. Instead, she found herself saying, "I needed to prove something to myself, and I needed to be somewhere no one knew me or my mistakes." He nodded as if this made perfect sense. "This is good country for starting over. I came out here 5 years ago after my father died, left behind a farm in Missouri that was more debt than land. Out here, a man can make his own way." "Or a woman," Beatrice added. "Or a woman," he agreed, and his tone held no condescension, only acknowledgement. The sun was sinking lower now, the colors deepening to purple and indigo. Beatrice turned back to her sketch, adding a few more swift lines. Jackson Ellis stood quietly, not intruding but not leaving either. His presence was oddly comfortable. "The light is going," she said finally. "I should return to town before full dark." "I will ride with you if you do not mind," he offered. "Not safe to be out alone after sunset. We have had some trouble with bandits working the road between here and Albuquerque." Beatrice had heard the same warnings from Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house. She gathered her supplies, tucking the charcoal sticks into their case and closing her sketch pad carefully. "I walked," she said. "It is only a mile or so." "Then I will walk alongside," he said. "My horse will not mind." They made their way down from the ridge in companionable silence at first, following a narrow path that wound between scrub brush and scattered rocks. The air was cooling rapidly as it did in the desert, and Beatrice was grateful for her shawl. "How long do you plan to stay in Socorro?" Jackson asked after a while. "I am not certain. At least through winter, I expect. I have a commission for 12 illustrations of southwestern landscapes. I have completed 4. 12 is ambitious." "I am an ambitious woman, Mr. Ellis." "Please, just Jackson, and I believe you. Anyone who comes all the way from Boston alone to sketch sunsets in New Mexico has to be." She glanced at him, trying to read his expression in the dimming light. "Does that trouble you? Ambitious women, should it?" He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "My mother ran our farm for 3 years while my father was off fighting in the war. She was the most ambitious and capable person I ever knew. I would be a fool to think less of women for having backbone." Beatrice felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized was tight. "That is a refreshing perspective. Seems like common sense to me, but I have been told I have peculiar ideas about things." They had reached the outskirts of Socorro now, where scattered buildings gave way to the more concentrated streets of the small town. Lamplight glowed in windows, and the sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons on the main street. "This is where I am staying," Beatrice said, stopping in front of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a tidy 2-story structure with a neat porch. "Thank you for the escort." Jackson touched his hat brim again. "My pleasure, Miss Palmer. Will you be at the Ridge tomorrow evening?" "Weather permitting. Then perhaps I will see you there." He remounted his horse with fluid ease and rode off into the gathering darkness. Beatrice stood on the porch steps for a long moment, watching him go, before going inside. Mrs. Henderson was in the front parlor, doing needlework by lamplight. She looked up when Beatrice entered. "You are back later than usual, dear. I was beginning to worry." "I am sorry. I met someone on the ridge, a Mr. Jackson Ellis. He was kind enough to escort me back." Mrs. Henderson's expression brightened. "Jackson Ellis? Oh, he is a good man. Works for the Double R Ranch west of town. His employer, Mr. Richard Ramsey, speaks very highly of him. Says Jackson has a gift with horses and cattle both. You could have done much worse for an escort." Beatrice felt oddly pleased by this endorsement. She excused herself to wash up before supper, climbing the narrow stairs to her small but comfortable room. It contained a bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a small desk where she worked on her illustrations in the mornings when the light was best. She set her sketch pad down carefully and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. As she washed the charcoal dust from her hands, she found her thoughts returning to Jackson Ellis. There had been something unguarded in their conversation, a lack of the social maneuvering she had grown so weary of in Boston. He had spoken to her as an equal, had shown genuine interest in her work, had not questioned her right to be out alone pursuing her art. These were small things, perhaps, but they felt significant. She told herself not to make too much of a chance meeting. He had been polite, nothing more. Yet as she lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Sakura settling in for the evening, she found herself hoping the weather would indeed permit her to return to the ridge the next day. Morning brought brilliant sunshine and a cloudless sky the color of turquoise. Beatrice spent the early hours working on one of her completed sketches, adding watercolor washes to bring out the depth and dimension. Her publisher in New York had been pleased with the samples she had sent and was eager for the remaining illustrations. The commission paid well enough to support her stay in Sakura and leave a small surplus, which gave her a heady sense of independence. After a midday meal with Mrs. Henderson and 2 other boarders, both miners who worked claims north of town, Beatrice took a walk through Sakura's streets. The town was small but bustling, serving as a supply point for the ranches and mines scattered through the surrounding territory. She stopped at the general store to purchase more charcoal and a new sketch pad, her current one being nearly full. The proprietor, Mr. Jessup, was a garrulous man who seemed to know everyone's business. "Heard you met young Jackson Ellis yesterday," he said as he wrapped her purchases in brown paper. "Good fellow. Saved my nephew from a nasty situation with a horse that had gone mean. Has a way about him with animals." Word traveled fast in small towns, Beatrice was learning. "He was very courteous," she said neutrally. "His employer thinks the world of him. Give it another year or 2, and I would not be surprised if Jackson has his own spread. He is the type to make something of himself." Beatrice thanked him and left with her supplies, pondering this. She had gathered that Jackson was a working cowboy, which meant he had little in the way of wealth or social standing. In Boston, such a man would never have been permitted to court a woman of her class. But she was not in Boston anymore, and the rules seemed different here, more fluid. Or perhaps it was that she cared less about rules than she once had. The afternoon passed slowly. She tried to work on another illustration, but found her concentration scattered. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, she gathered her materials and set out for the ridge. The walk was pleasant in the cooling air. She knew the path well now, her feet finding the way automatically while her eyes catalogued the changing light and shadow. When she reached the top of the ridge, she found herself scanning the valley below, looking for a rider. She settled into her usual spot and began sketching, forcing herself to focus on the work. She had nearly finished the preliminary outlines when she heard the soft thud of hoofbeats on packed earth. "Good evening, Miss Palmer." She looked up to see Jackson approaching on a handsome bay horse. Something warm and anticipatory bloomed in her chest. "Good evening, Jackson." He dismounted and ground-tied his horse, then came to stand a few feet away, hands hooked casually in his belt. "May I watch you work? I promise not to be a distraction." "You may," she said, though she suspected he would be exactly that. He settled himself on a nearby boulder, long legs stretched out before him. For a while, the only sounds were the scratch of her charcoal on paper and the occasional snort from his horse. Beatrice found the silence companionable rather than awkward. She added shadows to the mountains, deepened the clouds gathering on the horizon. "Storm coming tomorrow," Jackson observed. "You can see it building in those clouds." "Is it? I have not yet learned to read the weather here." "See how they are stacking up, and that yellowish tinge. We will have rain by midday tomorrow, I would wager." Then I will work indoors tomorrow. She glanced at him. Do you ride up here every evening? Most evenings, yes. It is on my way back from checking the stock in the far pastures. And I like the view, as do I. It never looks quite the same twice. No, he agreed. That is part of its appeal. She added a few more strokes, then set down her charcoal and flexed her fingers. Tell me about your work. What is it like managing cattle? He seemed pleased by her interest. It is hard work, but good work. Honest. The cattle are grazing freely now before we drive them to market in the spring. My job is to keep track of them, make sure they have water, watch for injury or illness. I work with 3 other hands, but Mr. Ramsey gives me considerable authority. He is a fair man, which is not always the case with ranch owners. You enjoy it. I do. I am outdoors, working with animals, solving problems as they arise. Every day is different, and the pay is decent enough that I have been able to save toward buying my own land eventually. You want your own ranch? A small one, yes. Nothing grand. Just enough to support a modest herd and maybe some horses. I have always wanted to breed horses properly, not just work with whatever comes my way. There was quiet ambition in his voice, a determination that Beatrice recognized because she felt it herself. I think you will do it, she said. Achieve that dream. He met her eyes and something passed between them, an understanding. I think you will achieve yours as well, whatever it may be. I want to make a living from my art, she said, surprised at herself for admitting this. She had not told anyone the full scope of her aspirations, had learned to keep them hidden after too many dismissive responses. Not just illustrate what publishers commission, though that is valuable. I want to paint what matters to me and have people value it enough to pay for it. I want galleries to show my work. I want to be taken seriously. Why should you not be? Because I am a woman. Because art is considered a frivolous pursuit for ladies, acceptable only as a drawing room accomplishment. Because the man I nearly married was humiliated when he learned I had been paid for my work. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he was a fool. That is what my father said eventually. My mother still thinks I should have hidden my ambitions better, been more accommodating. I am sorry you were made to feel that your talents were something shameful. They are not. What you create is beautiful and skilled. If others cannot see that, the failing is theirs, not yours. Beatrice felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had not realized how much she needed to hear such words, how heavy the weight of doubt and criticism had become. Thank you, she said quietly. The sun was lower now, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. Jackson stood and walked to stand beside her, looking at her sketch. This is your best yet, he said. The way you have captured the depth of the valley, the layers of mountains beyond, it feels like I could walk right into it. That is what I am trying for, she said. To make the viewer feel present in the landscape. You have succeeded. Their eyes met, and Beatrice felt something shift, a recognition that this was becoming more than casual acquaintance. She saw interest in his gaze, carefully restrained but present. I should get you back to town, he said, though he sounded reluctant. Yes, she agreed, equally reluctant. They made the walk together, talking about inconsequential things at first, then deeper subjects. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his mother's death when he was 19 and how it had unmoored him, sent him west seeking a new purpose. She told him about Boston, about the suffocating expectations and the relief of escaping them, even temporarily. You plan to return? He asked. To Boston, eventually, I suppose. My life is there, my family, but not yet. I am not ready. I am glad, he said simply. At the boarding house steps, he hesitated. Miss Palmer, would you object if I made a habit of escorting you back from the ridge? Not because I think you incapable, but because I would enjoy the company. I would not object at all, she said. In fact, I would welcome it. His face broke into a genuine smile, and she realized he had been uncertain of her answer. Then I will see you tomorrow evening, weather permitting. Weather permitting, she echoed. But the next day brought the rain Jackson had predicted, a steady downpour that turned Soccero's streets to mud and kept Beatrice indoors. She worked on illustrations and read a novel Mrs. Henderson loaned her, and tried not to feel disappointed about missing the sunset, though she knew it was not really the sunset she was missing. The rain continued for 3 days. By the 4th morning, when she woke to sunshine and clear skies, Beatrice felt restless with anticipation. She could barely focus on her work. Mrs. Henderson noticed and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. When evening finally came, Beatrice walked to the ridge with determined steps. She arrived slightly breathless and found Jackson already there, sitting on his horse, clearly waiting. I was worried you might not come, he called out as she approached. After so much rain. I would not miss it, she replied, then realized what she had revealed. He dismounted quickly, his expression open and glad. I am happy to hear that. I found these 3 days rather long, as did I. They stood looking at each other for a long moment. Then Jackson said, I should tell you, Miss Palmer, that my intentions in seeking your company are not purely friendly. I am aware we have known each other only a short time, but I find myself quite taken with you. If that is unwelcome, please tell me now and I will keep my distance. Beatrice's heart was beating very fast. It is not unwelcome at all. I am taken with you as well. His face brightened with relief and pleasure. Then may I court you properly, with your permission, of course. You have it, she said. Though I must be honest with you about my circumstances. I will need to return to Boston eventually. I have family obligations, responsibilities. I cannot simply abandon my former life entirely. I understand. I am not asking you to make any promises about the future. I am only asking for the chance to spend time with you now, to see where this might lead. Then yes, she said. I would like that very much. He stepped closer, still maintaining a respectful distance but near enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. May I take you to dinner tomorrow evening? There is a restaurant in town, nothing fancy, but the food is decent. I would enjoy that. She set up her sketching materials, but found it difficult to concentrate with Jackson nearby and this new understanding between them. He seemed similarly affected, watching her more than the sunset, with an expression that made her pulse quicken. Tell me what you see when you look at this landscape, he said after a while. What draws you to it? She considered the question seriously. Possibility, she said finally. This land feels unfinished, still being shaped, not tame and ordered like the East. There is room here for things to be different, for people to be different. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. That is exactly what drew me here as well. The feeling that I could become whoever I was meant to be, not whoever others expected me to be. Yes, she said. Exactly that. The light was fading, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave. Finally, as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, they made their way back to town. At the boarding house, Jackson took her hand briefly, his touch warm and steady. Until tomorrow, he said. Until tomorrow. Beatrice fairly floated up the stairs to her room. Mrs. Henderson caught her in the hallway and smiled. You look happy, dear. I am, Beatrice admitted. Very happy. Jackson Ellis is a good man. I am pleased for you both. Over the following weeks, Jackson and Beatrice fell into a pattern. He would meet her at the ridge most evenings and they would talk while she sketched. On Sundays, when he had time off from the ranch, they would take longer outings. He showed her the surrounding countryside, places she would not have found on her own. She filled sketchpad after sketchpad with images of the New Mexico landscape, her work growing richer and more confident. They talked about everything. He told her about his dreams for his own ranch, the type of horses he wanted to breed, where he might find suitable land. She told him about her artistic aspirations, her frustrations with the limitations placed on women artists, her determination to break through them somehow. "You will," he assured her. "You have too much talent and too much determination to be kept down." She had sent several completed illustrations back to her publisher in New York and received an enthusiastic response along with a request for more work. The money was good, better than she had hoped. She was building a reputation, slowly but surely. Dinner became a weekly occurrence, sometimes at the restaurant, sometimes at picnics. Jackson would pack and they would share at scenic spots he knew. He was courting her with steady patience, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but making his feelings increasingly clear. Beatrice found herself falling in love, truly in love, in a way she never had with her former fiancé. What she felt for Jackson was deeper and truer, based on genuine understanding and respect rather than social expectation. One evening in early November, as they sat on the ridge watching the sunset, Jackson said, "I need to tell you something." His serious tone made her set down her charcoal. "What is it?" "Mr. Ramsey has offered me a foreman position. It would mean more money, more responsibility, and it would put me significantly closer to being able to buy my own land." "Jackson, that is wonderful. You must be so pleased." "I am, but there is a complication. The position would require me to spend 3 months at a time at the ranch's northern range. It is isolated country, a 4-day ride from Socorro. I would be gone for extended periods." "Oh." Beatrice felt her heart sink. "I wanted to tell you before accepting." "If you would rather I decline, I will. I will find another way to achieve my goals." She looked at him, this good and honest man who was willing to alter his dreams for her sake. "You will not decline," she said firmly. "This is an important opportunity. You must take it. But it will mean time apart." "Then we will manage the time apart. Jackson, I will not be the person who holds you back from what you are meant to do. That would make me as bad as the people who tried to hold me back." He reached for her hand, held it gently. 3 months is a long time." "It is. But it is not forever. When do you need to go?" "Mid-December. After the first of the year." That gave them another month and a half. Beatrice felt a desperate need to make the most of every moment. Their courtship intensified in the weeks that followed. Jackson found reasons to come to town more frequently. Beatrice sketched faster so they could spend more time simply being together. They took long walks, talking and laughing, sometimes falling into companionable silences that felt as intimate as conversation. He kissed her for the first time in late November on the ridge at sunset. It was gentle and sweet, asking rather than demanding, and when they finally drew apart, Beatrice felt certain of what she wanted. "I love you," she said. "I did not intend to fall in love, but I have." "Thank God," he said, relief and joy in his voice. "I love you too. I have for weeks now." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she responded with all the emotion she had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me," Jackson said. "I know it is fast. I know there are complications with your life in Boston, but marry me anyway. We will figure out the rest." Beatrice knew she should be practical, should think of all the reasons this was complicated, but her heart knew what it wanted. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." His face transformed with happiness. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and the world felt full of possibility. They told Mrs. Henderson that evening. She cried happy tears and immediately began planning. "We will have the ceremony here," she declared. "In the parlor. It is small, but we can fit a reasonable number of guests." "When?" "Before I leave in December," Jackson said. "We have less than 3 weeks." "Then we had better get busy," Mrs. Henderson said practically. The next days passed in a blur of preparation. Beatrice wrote to her parents, explaining what she had decided. She knew they would be shocked, possibly angry, but she also knew she was doing the right thing. She was 22 years old, legally able to make her own choices, and she was choosing Jackson. She worked with determination to finish the remaining illustrations for her commission, knowing she would need the income. Jackson made arrangements to move his few possessions into a small house on the edge of Socorro that they could rent affordably. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but it had good light and enough space for Beatrice's art supplies. The local dressmaker created a simple but lovely wedding dress in cream-colored wool. Jackson bought a new suit. They secured the services of the circuit preacher who came through Socorro monthly. Everything came together with surprising smoothness, as if the universe was cooperating with their happiness. On December 10th, under a clear blue sky, Beatrice Palmer married Jackson Ellis in Mrs. Henderson's parlor. The guest list was small but heartfelt. Mrs. Henderson and her other boarders, Mr. Ramsey from the ranch and his wife, several of Jackson's fellow cowboys, Mr. Jessup from the general store, the dressmaker, and a handful of others Beatrice had befriended during her months in Socorro. She carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers. Jackson looked almost unbearably handsome in his new suit. When the preacher asked if she took this man as her husband, Beatrice said, "I do, with absolute certainty." Their wedding night was spent in the little rented house, and if Beatrice had any remaining doubts about her choice, they vanished in the warmth and tenderness of Jackson's embrace. He was patient and loving, and she felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. The next morning, she woke in her husband's arms and felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be. They had 5 days together before Jackson had to leave for the northern range. They spent them settling into their home, learning each other's habits, making love and making plans. Beatrice set up a workspace in the front room where the light was best. Jackson built her shelves for her supplies and a proper easel. "When I return in March, I want to find you with a stack of new paintings," he said. "Pursue your art, Beatrice. Use this time to create." "I will," she promised, "and you focus on doing excellent work so Mr. Ramsey will be even more impressed with you." The morning he left was bitterly cold. Beatrice bundled herself in a heavy coat and walked with him to where his horse was tied. His saddlebags were packed with supplies for the journey north. 3 months, he said, holding her close. "It will pass quickly." "It will feel like forever," she said, fighting tears. "Write to me." "Mr. Ramsey sends supply wagons every 3 weeks. They can carry letters." "I will write constantly." He kissed her long and hard, as if memorizing the feel of her mouth against his. Then he mounted up, and she stepped back, watching as he rode away. He turned in the saddle twice to wave, and she waved back until he disappeared from view. The house felt terribly empty without him. Beatrice walked through the 3 rooms, touching his things, already missing him with an ache that felt physical. But she had promised to use this time productively, and she would keep that promise. She threw herself into her work with fierce determination. The illustrations for her New York commission were completed and shipped. She began work on a series of paintings, more ambitious than anything she had attempted before. She painted the ridge at sunset, the valley where Jackson drove cattle, the mountains in the distance. She painted Socorro's streets and the faces of its people. She painted from memory and imagination, experimenting with color and technique. Letters from Jackson arrived with the supply wagons. She devoured each one, reading his descriptions of life at the northern range, the challenges he faced, the satisfaction of the work. He wrote that he missed her constantly, that he carried her last letter in his pocket and read it multiple times daily. She wrote back with equal frequency, telling him about her paintings, about life in Sakura, about how much she loved and missed him. Winter settled in with cold nights and occasional snow. Beatrice worked by lamplight in the evenings, sometimes until very late, driven by creative urgency. The work was good, she could feel it. These paintings were different from anything she had done before, more confident and assured. In January, a letter arrived from her parents. Her mother was hurt and angry that Beatrice had married without family present. Her father was more measured, saying he wished circumstances had been different, but hoping she was happy. Neither explicitly disapproved, which Beatrice took as tacit acceptance. She wrote back describing her life, her work, and especially Jackson. She wanted them to understand what she had found here, why she had made the choice she had. Whether they would understand was another matter, but she owed them the attempt. February brought warmer days and the first hints of spring. Beatrice's paintings now covered the walls of their little house. She had completed nearly 24 canvases, a productive winter by any measure. She began making inquiries about galleries in Santa Fe and Albuquerque that might be interested in showing her work. Several responded with interest. March arrived with wind and blowing dust. Beatrice counted down the days until Jackson's return with growing anticipation. She cleaned their house thoroughly, stocked provisions, and tried to manage her impatience. He arrived on the 14th of March, dusty and tired from the long ride but grinning broadly when he saw her waiting on the porch. She flew into his arms and he caught her easily, swinging her around as he had on the ridge when she had agreed to marry him. "Let me look at you," he said, setting her down and studying her face. "God, I have missed you. I have missed you too, so much." He kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they were standing in full view of the street. When they finally went inside, he stopped short, staring at the paintings covering every available surface. "Beatrice," he said, awed, "these are extraordinary. You have been working non-stop." "I told you I would. Look at this one. I think it is the best." She showed him a large canvas depicting the ridge at sunset, with a lone rider in the valley below. The rider was clearly Jackson, though she had painted him small, a human figure dwarfed by the landscape but belonging in it. "This is how you see me," he asked quietly, "part of this land, part of what makes it beautiful." He pulled her close, emotion thick in his voice. "I love you so much." That night, reunited in their bed, Beatrice felt complete again. The 3 months apart had been difficult, but had also proven something important. Their love was strong enough to survive separation, patient enough to endure challenges. Over the following days, Jackson told her about his time at the Northern Range. The work had been demanding but successful. Mr. Ramsey was extremely pleased and had hinted at further advancement opportunities. More immediately, he had a week off before returning to the regular ranch work. They spent the week luxuriating in each other's company. They rode out to the ridge together. They made love frequently and with joy. They talked about the future in more concrete terms now. "I have been calculating," Jackson said one evening as they lay in bed. "With the foreman's salary and what I have saved, I could afford to purchase land within 2 years, possibly sooner. Not a large spread, but enough to start. Where would this land be? There is a valley about 20 miles west of here. Good water, decent grazing. I have had my eye on it. Tell me about it." He described the place in loving detail, his vision for what it could become. Beatrice listened, imagining their future taking shape in his words. "There would be room for you to have a proper studio," he said. "A building with good north light, space for you to work as large as you want. You have thought about this. Every detail." including how beautiful you will look standing in the doorway when I come home each evening." She kissed him. "I think it sounds perfect." When Jackson returned to regular ranch work, they fell into a rhythm. He worked long days but came home most evenings. Beatrice continued painting and began seriously pursuing galleries. A dealer in Santa Fe agreed to show 3 of her paintings on consignment. It was a small start, but it was a start. In April, she discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with a mixture of joy and fear. She wanted children with Jackson, but she also worried about what motherhood would mean for her art. When she told him, he was thrilled. "A baby," he kept saying, wonderment in his voice. "Our baby." "I am frightened," she admitted. "I do not want to lose myself in motherhood." "I have seen it happen to so many women. They set aside their own dreams to focus entirely on children." "Then we will make sure that does not happen," he said firmly. "Your art is important. We will find a way to make room for everything." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I know you. You are too determined, too talented to let your work fall away, and I will support you however I can." She believed him. More than that, she trusted him. The months of pregnancy passed with remarkable smoothness. Beatrice worked steadily, knowing she should complete as much as possible before the baby arrived. The gallery in Santa Fe sold one of her paintings for a good price and requested more. A gallery in Albuquerque also agreed to represent her work. She was building a reputation as a painter of the Southwest, and buyers were responding. Jackson continued to excel at his work. In July, Mr. Ramsey made him assistant ranch manager, a significant promotion that came with a substantial raise. The dream of their own land was growing closer to reality. "Another year," Jackson said. "Maybe less. We will have enough." Their son was born in December, exactly 1 year after their wedding. The birth was long and difficult, attended by a midwife and Mrs. Henderson, who refused to be anywhere else. When Beatrice finally held her baby, exhausted and overwhelmed, she looked at Jackson standing beside the bed with tears running down his face and knew they had created something miraculous. They named him Thomas, after Jackson's father. He was a good baby, relatively quiet, with Jackson's brown eyes and Beatrice's dark hair. Beatrice fell completely in love with him while simultaneously terrifying herself with the weight of responsibility. The first months were harder than she had anticipated. Thomas needed constant attention. She was exhausted from nursing and sleepless nights. Her art supplies sat unused, and she felt herself growing resentful and then guilty about the resentment. Jackson noticed her struggling. "You need to paint," he said. "You have not touched a brush in 2 months. There is no time." "Thomas needs me constantly." "Then we will make time. Mrs. Henderson has offered to watch Thomas a few afternoons a week. Let her paint while she is here." "I cannot impose like that." "It is not imposing. She loves Thomas and is happy to help. Beatrice, you are fading. I can see it. You need your art." So she began painting again, a few hours twice a week at first, then more regularly. Mrs. Henderson was as good as her word, delighting in caring for Thomas. Gradually, Beatrice found her equilibrium. She was a mother, yes, but she was also still herself. Both things could be true. Thomas grew sturdy and healthy. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything. Beatrice had completed enough new work for a small show at the Santa Fe Gallery, her first solo exhibition. Jackson insisted they all go, making the multi-day journey with Thomas in tow. The show was a success. Several paintings sold, and she received significant critical attention. A reviewer for a Santa Fe newspaper called her work a fresh and authentic voice capturing the spirit of the Southwest with remarkable skill. She carried that review home like a treasure. In the spring, Jackson found the land he had been dreaming of. The valley he had described was available for purchase at a price they could afford with the money they had saved. They spent a day riding over it, Jackson pointing out the features that made it ideal. The creek that ran year-round, the natural meadows perfect for grazing, the sheltered areas for buildings. "What do you think?" he asked, anxious for her opinion. Beatrice looked around at the open space, the mountains in the distance, the huge sky overhead. She could see their future here as clearly as if it were painted before her. "I think it is perfect. I think we should buy it." They signed the papers in May of 1880. It was official. They owned 320 acres of New Mexico territory. It was not a huge spread by ranching standards, but it was theirs, entirely and completely. The next months were consumed with building. They hired help to construct a modest house, a barn, and a separate studio for Beatrice, just as Jackson had promised. The studio had huge windows facing north and enough space for her to work on multiple large canvases simultaneously. It was more than she had ever dreamed of having. They moved to the new ranch in August. Thomas was nearly 2 by then, running everywhere, fascinated by the horses and cattle. Jackson started small, purchasing 20 head of cattle and a few horses, including 2 mares with excellent bloodlines that would form the foundation of his breeding program. The work was constant and demanding. Beatrice learned to ranch by necessity, helping with the stock, maintaining the property, managing their household. She painted whenever she could find time, often early in the morning before Thomas woke or in the evening after he was asleep. Life was hard but deeply satisfying. They were building something together, creating the life they had envisioned. Some days were frustrating, exhausting, full of setbacks and challenges. But there were also days of profound contentment, moments of simple happiness that made everything worthwhile. In 1882, their second child was born, a daughter they named Clara. She had Beatrice's green eyes and Jackson's sunny temperament. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Beatrice now had 2 children, a ranch to help run, and art she was determined to continue creating. It was a lot, sometimes too much, but Jackson was a true partner in managing it all. He took over childcare when she needed to paint. He hired help when they could afford it. He never made her feel that her art was less important than the practical work of the ranch. Her reputation continued to grow. Galleries in Denver and San Francisco began showing her work. Prices for her paintings increased. She was making a real income from her art now, money that helped support the ranch and their growing family. Jackson's horse breeding program was also succeeding. His instincts about bloodlines proved sound, and he was developing a reputation for producing quality animals. Ranchers from across the territory came to purchase his horses. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their children. Thomas started school in Socorro, riding in with Jackson several times a week. Clara grew from baby to toddler to little girl, bright and curious about everything. In 1885, Beatrice had her first major exhibition in Denver. Jackson insisted they all go, closing up the ranch for a week and making the journey as a family. Thomas was 7 and Clara 3. The show was a triumph, with nearly every painting selling. A wealthy collector purchased 3 canvases and commissioned a 4th. "You have done it," Jackson said as they stood in the gallery, surrounded by her work and the admiring crowd. "Everything you wanted to achieve. You are a recognized and successful artist." "We have done it," she corrected. "I could never have managed this without your support." He kissed her, right there in the gallery with people watching, not caring about propriety. "I am so proud of you," he said. By 1887, the ranch was thriving. They now ran 50 head of cattle and had a string of 12 horses, including several colts from Jackson's breeding program that showed exceptional promise. They had hired 2 hands to help with the daily work, young men from Socorro, eager to learn ranching. Beatrice converted part of the barn into a larger studio, needing more space as her canvases grew more ambitious. She was working on a series depicting the changing seasons on their ranch, large paintings that would be her most significant work to date. Thomas was 9 now, already showing signs of becoming a capable rancher like his father. He could ride anything, had a gift with horses, and took his responsibilities seriously. Clara was 5, dividing her time between following her brother everywhere and sitting in Beatrice's studio, drawing her own pictures with intense concentration. One evening, as Beatrice and Jackson sat on their porch watching the sunset, Thomas and Clara playing in the yard, he took her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving Boston, marrying me, building this life?" She looked at him, this man she had fallen in love with on a ridge 10 years ago. His face was more weathered now, his hands more calloused, but his eyes held the same warmth and integrity that had attracted her from the beginning. "Not for a single moment," she said. "This life with you is everything I never knew I wanted. I am exactly where I am meant to be." "As am I," he said, bringing her hand to his lips. "As am I." In 1889, something significant happened that would change the trajectory of Beatrice's career. A prominent art critic from New York traveled west and made a point of visiting her studio after seeing her work in a Denver gallery. His name was Mr. Philip Morrison, and his reviews could make or break an artist's reputation. Beatrice was nervous as she showed him through her studio, explaining her process and the subjects that drew her. He studied each painting in silence, occasionally asking a question, his face revealing nothing. Finally, he turned to her. "Mrs. Ellis, your work is extraordinary. You are capturing something authentic about the West that most artists miss. There is a market for this in New York, a significant market. I would like to help you break into it." Within months, she had gallery representation in New York City. The irony was not lost on her that she had to travel to New Mexico and build a completely different life before the city she had fled from would take her art seriously. Her first New York show opened in the spring of 1890. She and Jackson traveled there together, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson, who had remained a close friend and surrogate grandmother. It was Beatrice's first time back east in 13 years. Boston felt foreign to her now, too crowded and rigid after the open spaces of New Mexico. But New York was exhilarating. The gallery show was a major success. Her paintings of the Southwest fascinated audiences who had never seen such landscapes. She sold every piece and received multiple commissions. The New York Times Review called her one of the most exciting voices in contemporary American landscape painting, and noted that her gender made her achievement all the more remarkable. Beatrice felt vindicated in every choice she had made. They visited her parents while east. The meeting was awkward at first. Her mother had never quite forgiven her for the elopement, and both parents were clearly unsure what to make of Jackson, who was not the society husband they had envisioned for their daughter. But Jackson won them over, as Beatrice had known he would. He was respectful but not obsequious, intelligent and articulate, clearly devoted to Beatrice and proud of her accomplishments. By the end of the visit, even her mother had warmed to him. "I suppose you have done well for yourself," her mother admitted grudgingly. "You seem happy." "I am, Mother. Happier than I ever would have been in Boston." "Perhaps," her mother said. "Perhaps." They returned to New Mexico with renewed appreciation for the life they had built. The ranch, their children, the open sky, it was all sweeter for having experienced the alternative. The next years were among the happiest of Beatrice's life. Her art career flourished. She had regular shows in major cities and a waiting list of collectors eager to purchase her work. The income from her paintings now exceeded what the ranch produced, though Jackson's horse breeding program was also quite profitable. Thomas grew into a responsible young man, eventually taking over much of the daily ranch management. Clara showed artistic talent and often painted alongside her mother in the studio. In 1895, Beatrice gave birth to another son, whom they named Henry. His arrival, when Beatrice was 40 and had thought she was done having children, was a surprise but a welcome one. Jackson's dream of building a successful ranch had been realized beyond his initial vision. They now ran over 100 head of cattle and maintained a breeding program that produced some of the finest horses in the territory. Other ranchers sought his advice, and he was respected throughout the region. But what mattered most was not the professional success, but the life they had built together. They had created a partnership based on mutual respect and support. They had raised children who were confident and capable. They had each pursued their dreams without diminishing the others. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1895, Jackson took Beatrice back to the ridge where they had first met. It was evening, the same time of day, and the sunset was as spectacular as ever. "Do you remember the first time I saw you here?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the light fade. "You startled me and made me ruin my sketch," she said, smiling. "I was terrified to approach you. You seemed so focused, so serious. I almost rode past." "I am glad you did not, as am I. That decision changed my entire life. Mine too." He turned her to face him. 20 years, and I love you more now than I did then. I did not think that was possible, but it is true." "I feel the same," she said. "You are my best friend, my partner, my love. Everything good in my life comes from choosing you." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. When they finally pulled apart, Beatrice said, "I should sketch this sunset. It would complete the circle. Then I will watch, just as I did that first evening." She pulled out a small sketch pad she had brought for exactly this purpose. As she drew, Jackson sat nearby, and Beatrice felt the profound satisfaction of a life fully lived. She had achieved her artistic dreams. She had found love and partnership. She had raised a family and helped build a successful ranch. She had done it all without compromising who she was. The years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary miracles of life. Children grew and eventually started families of their own. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and gave them grandchildren. Clara went to art school in Denver and returned to open her own studio in Santa Fe, building on the foundation her mother had established. Henry showed an interest in law and eventually became Soccero's town attorney. Beatrice continued painting into her 60s, her work evolving and deepening with age. She had several major retrospectives of her career, and her paintings were now in museums and important private collections across the country. Art historians wrote about her contributions to Western American art. Jackson remained active on the ranch until his health began declining in his early 70s. Even then, he rode out most days, unable to stay away from the land he had worked so hard to build. Beatrice painted him often in these years, capturing the dignity of age and hard work lived. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1910, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends. Soccero had grown over the decades but still felt like home. Many of the people who had attended their wedding were gone now, but some remained, grown old together. Mrs. Henderson, now in her 90s and still sharp as ever, made the journey from town to attend. "I knew from the start you two were meant for each other," she declared. "I have never seen a more well-matched couple." Looking around at the gathering, at the family they had created, and the life they had built, Beatrice could only agree. She had set out from Boston all those years ago seeking something she could not name. She had found it here in the New Mexico territory, in the open spaces and endless sky, and most especially in the lonely cowboy who had become her favorite view. The final years were gentle. They spent their days in comfortable companionship, Jackson in his favorite chair on the porch, Beatrice still painting though less frequently now. They told stories to their grandchildren, passing on the history of the ranch and their unlikely courtship. Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1916, at 77 years old. Beatrice held his hand as he took his last breath, grateful beyond words for the 51 years they had shared. The grief was profound but bearable, softened by the knowledge that they had loved each other well and built a life of meaning together. She continued on for another decade, painting occasionally, spending time with family, living quietly on the ranch that had been their shared dream. Her last painting, completed when she was 85, was a view from the ridge where she had first seen Jackson. The painting showed a lone rider in the valley below, forever moving through a landscape painted in gold and crimson. Beatrice Palmer Ellis passed away peacefully in 1926, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She was buried next to Jackson on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a view of the mountains and the endless New Mexico sky. Her obituary in the Santa Fe newspaper called her a pioneering woman artist who helped define how Americans see the West. But those who knew her best remembered her differently. As a devoted wife and mother, a talented and determined artist, a woman who had the courage to choose her own path and the strength to see it through. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Clara's daughter eventually inherited it and maintained both the ranching operation and her grandmother's studio, which became something of a shrine to Beatrice's memory. Collectors and art historians made pilgrimages there to see where the paintings had been created. But perhaps the truest memorial was the life itself, the decades of love and partnership and creative achievement. Beatrice had wanted to be taken seriously as an artist, and she had achieved that. She had wanted to live authentically, and she had done that too. Most importantly, she had found love with a man who saw her fully and supported her completely. From that first evening on the ridge when a lonely cowboy had interrupted her sketching, to the final days when she looked back on a life fully lived, Beatrice Palmer Ellis had followed her heart and her art wherever they led. She had proven that a woman could be both artist and wife, mother and professional, that these identities need not contradict, but could instead enrich each other. The sunset paintings she had created over the years hung in galleries and homes across America, each one capturing not just a landscape, but a feeling, a moment, a truth about beauty and perseverance, and the possibility of building something meaningful in wild and open spaces. And in every painting, if you looked closely enough, you could see the shadow of a lone rider, the cowboy who had become her favorite view and her truest love, forever present in the landscape of her heart.